Hello and welcome to Workplace Conversations. I'm Edward Obi, Director of AskHRHubPlus, and your host in these chats about the ins and outs of the modern workplace. This week, I'm joined by Anna Meller, a work-life balance and redesign expert who has spent 25 years supporting employers in upgrading their flexible working practices through evaluating strategic and operational aspects of their work. In Anna's book, #Upcycle Your Job, the smart way to balance family life and career, she provides a clear case for why flexible working is particularly important in women's careers. Anna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
No problem at all. So, before we move in, let me just ask you this question. #Upcycle Your Job. How did that come about?
I was writing the book. I wanted to write a book because there's quite a lot out there. There's quite a lot of myths out there around work-life balance, what it means, what it is, and lots of very popular opinion. And with my background, I wanted to write something which was evidence-based, and I needed a title. And I've been talking to a good friend of mine who is actually quite big in the upcycling community. So she supports people who upcycle furniture, who upcycle clothes, who upcycle other items. And I said to her, you know, it's very similar with what we're trying to do in the workplace. You take something that you've known that was fit for purpose, that was good for you, and now isn't quite right, and you upcycle it to be more relevant. So you keep the best of it and then you add to it to enhance it. So as I'll be talking about a bit later, this is really what's happening with jobs. We need to be thinking about redesigning jobs, and upcycling seemed to be a good word for the way we approach that, which is how the title came up.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Now it's time to go into the nitty-gritty of this podcast. We've got quite a few questions from our listeners and friends. So I'll start with the first question from Amanda. She's from Edinburgh. Now, why is it that the more senior you progress in a role, flexibility seems to be non-existent? Why is that?
Hi, Amanda. Well, to answer that question, I think it's a combination of issues, but primarily it's to do with the fact that corporate cultures are not set up and have not been set up to allow that flexibility. Most corporate cultures still work on a 1950s model, which is a lot of people refer to as a man-made culture. So it fits working men's lives, or the perception of working men's lives. It doesn't fit women's lives. So when we talk about looking for flexibility at more senior levels, it tends to be women particularly that ask that, because obviously they're trying to combine work with caring responsibilities or other family responsibilities. And so far we haven't been able to make the inroads culturally to make that acceptable. So there are some women around. In fact, there are lots of men around as well who are working those flexible patterns. Usually they're inside a job and rather than applying for it, and usually it's very well hidden. It's operating what I call under the radar. So inside an organisation it can be possible, and I can give examples of that if you want, Edward, but it's still not something that is in the cultural consciousness of most organisations.
Okay, that's very, very interesting, because your book, #Upcycle Your Job, provides a clear case for why flexible working is particularly important in women's careers. Some may ask, though, why the focus on women?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm going to be honest about this. My focus is on women because I've been, I would call myself a feminist. I've been a feminist for my whole working life. And when I left university, right at the end of the 1970s, in the UK, we had just introduced the Equal Pay and the Equal Opportunities Acts. And I naively went out into the workforce thinking, right, that's it, done and dusted. Women are there, we're on a level playing field. And in the early years, it does appear that men and women are on a level playing field. And then we get to the point where women decide to have families. And at that point, there's a huge amount of documented research that shows that women are penalised and that women find it very hard to navigate into those more senior roles. Now, at the same time, organisations are at risk of losing a lot of female talent because they're not accommodating their women. So while some people will say to me, yeah, but men want this as well. Of course, men want, a lot of younger men in particular want this as well. But for most of them, there's still a way of navigating, and there are still cultural issues that they have to sort out. It's a really big issue for both talented women who often drop out of organisations and for the organisations that employ them, where if we look at the figures, the number of women in senior roles is still a tiny percentage of the number of men. So that's why I focus specifically on women, because there's a difference in the way that women's careers shape up, and trying to kind of pull it all together with men, with everybody else, I think kind of makes it fuzzier and dilutes it more. I prefer to be more specific in what we can do.
Okay. Interesting. A great response. So for everyone listening to this podcast at this point, now you know why the focus of the book, #Upcycle Your Job, focuses on women. Now, the next question is from a man, Brian from Dundee. So his question is, should all jobs be considered up for flexible working by default?
Hi, Brian. And my answer to that question is yes, but. So I would say all jobs should be considered for flexible working, but not by default, but by design. And I'm not arguing semantics here. I'm going to explain the differences. I know that both the proposed legislation that now seems to have slipped off the government radar and a lot of people campaigning in this area are saying all jobs should be available by default on flexible working terms. Now, to my way of thinking and based on my experience, the risk there is that we just default to a poor way of working. So I would prefer to see all jobs on a flexible basis by design, which means that we look at how that job can be redesigned in the best way to allow for flexible working. And there are two reasons for that. The first is to do with the individual job holder. And to give you an example of how flexibility by default can go wrong, I'll just give you any example of any woman I've spoken to who has asked for her 5-day week job to be reduced to 3 days or maybe 4 days. And employers will say, yeah, okay, you can do that, without giving any guidance whatsoever on how to do that. So what happens is the woman ends up doing 5 days work in 3 or in 4 because nobody has come in and said to her, let's look at how we can restructure that job. Let's look at what bits are key. Let's look at what we're trying to achieve and redesign that job for flexibility. But there is also a bigger piece here, and this is about redesigning jobs for the future anyway. And this is an area that HR professor John Boudreau has been writing on recently. And it's about looking at how AI, artificial intelligence, is going to change jobs. So jobs are going to need to be redesigned anyway. Why don't we redesign them so that they not only accommodate new technology, but they also incorporate best working practices that safeguard people's well-being and make them productive? So there you go. I'm saying, yes, let's have flexibility, but not by default, but by design.
That's very, very interesting, which leads us perfectly to the next question. Now, this question is from Alan, a business owner here in Aberdeen. Alan's asking, what suggestions do you have to manage a flexible workforce?
Hi, Alan. Well, I have three key suggestions for you in how you manage your flexible workforce. The first is look at your jobs and consider the outputs. So work from there. Don't start from how many hours, don't start from location, start from what are we trying to achieve? What are the measurable outputs that will know this job is succeeding and over what timescales? So clearly define your outputs. That's the first thing. The second thing is then hand it over to your teams so that at the team level, they solve how will we work this flexible arrangement or the flexible arrangements that people need in order to achieve those outputs within those timescales. Treat them as grown-ups, let them do it, but let them do it at the team level. And I'm saying this because I very often come across situations where a team manager feels that it's their responsibility to sort all this flexibility out. And quite frankly, they can't do it, and it's going to take up a lot of their time. Get the team together and say, right, let's all make this work because it's in everybody's interest. And then the third thing that I would say is discipline and use capability just as you would do if people were working pre-flexibility or standard hours. So again, I've come across a lot of managers who don't know where to draw the line with discipline because someone's working flexibly because they have other concerns outside of work. So the manager's saying, well, is it this, is it that? Don't be frightened to say, is this a capability issue that you're not performing? Is there something you need to know? And it may be, because if someone's working flexibly, they may need to work differently. And don't be frightened to discipline someone. So if somebody agrees to a working pattern and they're still not producing, or they're not working within those arrangements, discipline them in the same way as you would any other employee. So those three things really, focus on outputs, team level decisions, and don't be afraid of discipline and capability where it's needed.
Thank you very much for that, Anna. Previously you clarified the difference between design and default. Now, Caroline has a question. And Caroline asks, some organizations are now talking about hybrid, agile, and flexible working. How are these terms different from each other?
Hi, Carolyn. Well, I'd like to tell you that they were different, but I think it's more a kind of a history and jumping on the bandwagon. So when I first started in this whole thing, we used to call it family friendly. We had family friendly policies, which particularly acknowledged that women worked differently or needed to work differently. And then somebody said, oh, family friendly, that seems a bit, not inclusive. That's only for mothers of young children. Let's call it flexible. So everybody then started calling it flexible working. And then somebody else came along and said, well, flexibility, again, it's still tinged with this. Some people need flexibility, others don't. There's this new phrase, agile, which had come out of the technology industry and is used completely differently there. And I have written a blog on this about if we used agile in the same way as they do in tech, that would be a great approach for flexible working. But it's just a term as far as flexible working is concerned. So people say, right, no, we're not flexible, we're agile. And then obviously since the pandemic, we've got this new area called hybrid working, which really is no different from flexible working that allowed some remote working. So all of these phrases really don't move the agenda forward. They're just relabeling the same circumstances.
So why do people easily get confused about it?
Well, I think because for most people, as I say, employers tend to jump on this bandwagon of, we'll call it agile or we'll call it hybrid. And then people don't really think about at that level. They don't really think about it more deeply. Now, I always campaigning for HR, first of all, to take a bigger responsibility for the flexible working agenda and for redesigning jobs. And those are the key things that should be HR expertise. For individual managers or for people trying to work in a more flexible way, it's a bit confusing. Am I agile? Am I hybrid? And of course, hybrid can be a lot more restrictive than old flexible working patterns. And it's interesting to see that some of the reports appear to show that while more employers are saying, yes, you can do hybrid working, other forms of flexibility are becoming harder to find.
Okay. That's very, very interesting. And thanks for clarifying that. Hopefully, Carol will watch this later on and then, take some golden nuggets from you. So, Mike from London asks, what are some of the organizational benefits of flexible working?
Okay, Mike, organisational benefits. I was thinking about this before and I've just checking my prompt sheet. I've got 4 specifically that I would name for you. The first one, it supports your inclusivity agenda. Because there are many people who cannot work standard patterns, and that's not just mums of young children. It could be that somebody has a disability and that they cannot travel into the office at a specific time, or they're better off working remotely. It could be that they themselves have a partner who needs care and therefore they cannot work in the same way. So, and it could be one of the employers I worked with who did do this on the inclusivity agenda, also recognise things like cultural issues. So there are some cultures where people may want to go back to family in another country for longer periods, and that flexibility would allow them to do that. So the first benefit is that it supports inclusivity. The second benefit is that it widens your candidate reach. And in what is now a very, very tight candidate market, that is incredibly important. There was some research from funded by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation several years ago that said nearly 2 million people were stuck in jobs below their skills level because they couldn't find the flexibility that they needed. So if you can offer that flexibility, you're going to attract more and often better candidates for your vacancies. The third benefit is to do with productivity. There's been quite a bit of research now, often conducted by universities. There was some research by Cranfield along with the charity Working Families that showed that flexible workers, when flexibility is working correctly, can be not just as productive, but often more productive than people on standard working patterns. And the fourth benefit is to do with well-being. If we allow people to work in ways that accommodate their other responsibilities in life, then they're feeling less stress, they have more time to take a break, to recuperate, to recover. They're going to be healthier, both physically and mentally, and overall your workforce is going to have higher well-being. So those 4 benefits.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's good to see the benefits listed very, very clearly. Now, the next question, it all depends on how you want to answer it, but I think it's very, very important. How true is it that women select themselves out of middle management or senior roles based on experience?
Right. Well, on this, I can speak to 2 things. I can speak to my own research and I can speak to research carried out by other people. So I did some research, this is quite a while back now, in the legal sector, where it was evident that because of the current limitations to access to flexible working, a lot of women were putting themselves into what they call mummy track jobs, so jobs that are less likely to lead to those career roles that lead to promotion. So they would be self-selecting them into that, and they would do that on the basis that they felt they had no other option but to do that if they wanted to continue working in those professional environments. Now, that's my personal experience. A couple of references to other research. First of all, the charity Working Families has, I haven't seen the latest figures this year, but for 2 to 3 years before we went into lockdown, they were doing research that was actually showing that women were holding themselves back from promotion because they were concerned about their work-life balance. They were concerned about how they would manage their caring responsibilities as well as a more senior role. And worryingly, this was also that the trend was rising among the men, the fathers that they were talking to. So that's one organisation that has research that shows this. The other one is the Chartered Management Institute, which has produced a paper called The Missing Middle, where they've actually shown there's something like about 1 million women missing from middle management who therefore cannot go into the pipeline into more senior roles. And again, there are going to be a multitude of reasons for that. But one big reason that a lot of people acknowledge is that flexible working is incredibly important to women. And if they cannot get flexible working, then they will select themselves out of either promotion or even out of that organisation into something maybe even at a lower skills level where they can get the flexibility.
So, that's an untapped skill set, because if you imagine the type of skill set these individuals have that will benefit the organization, and yet they're not, or maybe the organization is not in a position to recognize that. How would you redesign that?
Right, okay, I think you make a really good point there, Edward, about that being an untapped skill set, because anybody who's read the book Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez will know that she makes a powerful argument for how many products and services are either badly designed or not at all designed for women. So, there's a very powerful argument for including the experience of women into more areas at more levels, and particularly moving into senior levels. So in terms of redesigning that, I know a lot of organisations do have women's programmes. They try to encourage women into more senior roles. But as a lot of commentators say, what they're trying to do is they're trying to fix the women rather than fix the organisation. So they say, right, okay, what made the men successful? It was, assertiveness, self-confidence, whatever. We'll teach the women that and they will move up the organisation. And surprise, surprise, they don't, because it does come back to flexible working. Women need that flexible working as a reassurance that they will be able to balance their work and their home lives. So I would say to any organisation, don't leave your flexible working approach to simply a policy statement and then out to managers. Somebody in your HR function, if you have one, somebody at senior levels needs to own that agenda, to monitor what is going on, and to really push those conversations about how to increase the number of flexible jobs in the organisation, to increase flexible working in at all levels in the organisation, and to offer the expertise to managers on how to redesign those jobs, because there are various ways, and there's a lot of academic research again around how to restructure jobs for flexibility, but somebody needs to own that. It can't just be, as we were saying earlier, a default position. Oh yeah, we've got some legislation that allows that, just apply and sort it out with your manager. It's just not going to work. It needs to be strategic.
Thank you very much, because strategic is important, especially the design as well. So Denise from Derby asks, gender pay gap reporting is on the horizon for larger organizations, those that employ 250 or more employees. What are the benefits of flexible working on gender inequality in organizations?
Hi, Denise. Well, I think some of that has already been answered. But what is interesting is that the EHRC did an analysis of the action plans that supported gender pay gap reports. And it was either the first or second action that was listed by the majority of employers with big gender pay gaps was enabling more access to flexible working. But of course, guess what? The rhetoric isn't at the moment meeting the reality. And in my book, the first couple of chapters in my book, I do look at why flexible working is so important, some of which we've already discussed, and the number of authorities who've actually pinpointed this. Everybody from people like McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group to the Women's Business Council in the UK, who have said that women need flexible working if they are going to progress through the organisation. So again, if organisations are serious about reducing their gender pay gap, they really need a strategic approach to flexible working. And just to give you an example here, a couple of years ago, I linked up on LinkedIn with the head of HR for Zurich Insurance, who at that time took the radical step of offering all vacancies on a flexible basis. So you could apply for any vacancy right to the top of the organisation, and the number of women applying increased dramatically, which just shows the evidence for how much unmet need there is for women, from women for that flexibility. So as I say, if you're serious about improving your gender pay gap, you need a strategic approach to flexible working.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. So, what advice would you give to employees navigating this new way of working?
Right. Okay. Again, there are three things that I would say to employees. And at the moment, it's incredibly confusing, I know, because we've had all that sort of old flexible working where you could or couldn't get it. Then suddenly we've got this overlay of hybrid working. You can hybrid or you can't hybrid. And now, more recently, and I know it's happening a lot in Scotland, Edward, we've got this experiment with the 4-day working week. So within all of that, how do you get the flexibility that you need? Well, again, I would say, first of all, buy my book. There's a little plug, but, there are lots of exercises to guide you through what you think you need at this point in time. Think about it, really think through the benefits, not just to yourself, but to your organisation. Why will this be good for you, and why this particular way of working? How can you make it succeed, and how can you work with your manager to make it succeed? So really put the planning in and really prepare for doing that, so that when you actually get into it, it's not a case of, oops, I didn't think about that. You've got a smooth run on that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and the thing that, again, I list in my book as one of the key skills, is communication. It comes out as the top skill for ensuring any flexible working arrangement works. So, for many people, they agree a flexible arrangement, and then nobody around them seems to be taking any notice of that. The onus is on you to communicate the flexibility you are working, and when you will get back to them, how you will deal with them if they are a client, if they're a customer or whatever. So communication, and also with your colleagues, so that everybody knows this is your flexible arrangement and how quickly you'll get back to them. You're managing your boundaries, but you're doing that through clear communication. So the more you can communicate and communicate clearly with everybody around you, the more successful that's going to be. And the third thing I would say is, remember that in a lot of these cases, you're going to be a pioneer. And again, something I talk about in the book is about how when in the 1960s, employers needed a new workforce and they went out to bring in working mothers, a lot of those working mothers had to be pioneers in new ways of working. So they weren't necessarily always going to get it right first time, but they were the ones that were there working it out. And these days, working it out can be easier than it has been, because I was talking earlier about looking under the radar. If you want to work differently, one of the first questions to ask is there anybody else who I know who is working a similar pattern? Is there something that my organisation is already supporting that's a little bit like this? And can I push this agenda forward? So recognise that it may not be comfortable, but you're a pioneer in this area. Find some support, find a coach, find some support from HR if you can, maybe, because you point out to them it's good for their gender pay gap, but recognize that you are pioneering a new way of working that's going to benefit you, but ultimately is, if you have children, it's going to benefit your children, it's going to benefit people around you. So have the confidence to go for it. So those are my 3 tips for people who, for employees. Think it through clearly, communicate, and remember that you're a pioneer. So find yourself some support.
Thank you very much. So finally, the 4-day working week trial. We've got 6 months to see what the outcome will be. What's your take on it?
Right. Well, excuse me. On the one side, I commend any employer who is thinking about how they can offer more flexible working patterns. And of course, I'm not involved in these 4-day working week trials, so I don't know what's going on inside the organisation. I don't know whether they're trying to squeeze 5 days work into 4, whether they've been redesigning jobs so that they truly can be done in 4 days, or what's happening there. But obviously it's a very good place to start, and lessons will be learned that the organisation can build upon. However, it may not work for everybody. So, for example, if you are the parent of children, then childcare tends to be 5 days a week anyway, and often it's quite difficult to just get it for 4 days. You have to pay for 5 days. They may want to work a different pattern. So my take on it would be, yeah, it's great as an option, but let's not exclude every other option just by focusing on the 4-day week.
Anna, thank you very much. That's all we have time for today. Thanks for joining us. Now, where can our listeners find your book?
Right, okay, well, the book is available on Amazon, and as I was saying to somebody recently, when you put a book on Amazon, you have no control as to how much it costs, and Amazon are very kindly discounting my book at the moment. So for the price of, a coffee and a pizza, you could buy the book and improve your working life. So I would urge you to have a look at that.
Thank you. And you can find us on more social media. Use the hashtag AskHRHubPlus to get in touch with us. We'll be sharing about upcoming episodes using it, and you could have your workplace question answered in a future episode. Thanks to Amanda, Brian, Alan, Caroline, Mike, and Denise for sending their questions this week. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep up with other videos on our channel, and we'll see you next time for another workplace conversation.